Hey everyone, how are you guys? Welcome to this webinar from our Scale Global Network. So we gather at a moment when supply chains are having a hard time and they are not just operational systems. They have become the front lines of many different arenas and where geopolitics are playing a very important role, resilience, security have been challenged, and also human welfare has changed a lot. Conflicts across different regions and are creating a lot of potential disruptions in food, energy, and many different commodities that are also important for the economies around the world, sometimes even challenging the industrial competitiveness and challenging the supply chains in general. In a fractured world, supply chains have become not something related to efficiency, but actually related to something called adaptation, agility, and alignment, where we need to develop a strategic thinking about it. So one of the questions that we are going to try to solve today is like, are we witnessing a potential era of turbulence that we can change, or is a permanent rewiring of how supply chains work around the world? My name is Chris Mejia. I'm a research scientist at the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. I'm also the director of the Emerging Market Economy Logistics Lab. And today I'm going to be moderating this very interesting panel. So while I introduce my colleagues, the discussion panelists, I'm going to request my colleagues here to launch the first poll to ask your opinion regarding the main challenges that we are facing currently regarding, like the geopolitical tensions and the conflict. So feel free to share your opinion regarding those. Meanwhile, I would like to introduce my colleagues, Jasmine. And Jasmine, I'm going to start, like sharing also the slide here so that you are able actually to see some of the interesting. Here we go. Now you can see it. So Professor or Dr. Jasmine Sabri, she works at the UK Scale Center. Her research focuses on resilience, critical minerals, food, and other commodities, the UK Scale Center. Gerardo Heckman is a doctor and specifically an economist working in Universidad Nacional de Córdoba in Argentina, but he's also a research affiliate of our center in Latin America, and his research focus on supply chain applications and interfaces with economics. Then we have Professor Rafael de Miguel González, who is a geographist and also the director of our center in Zaragoza, Spain. And he focuses on global supply chains and the impact of geography and the connections between China and the rest of the world. And last but not least, we have Professor Joachim Arts, whose research is focused on spare parts, reliability, global supply chains, resilience, and many other matters. So I would like to welcome you all, guys. And in order to keep this going, they are going to position with elevator pitches their main ideas. So I'm going to start with you, Jasmine, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. So Jasmine, go ahead, take it over.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for having me. And I was really excited when I received your email for this invite, because this is a topic that I've been wrestling with for quite some time, working with in my research, working with many companies to navigate this complex landscape. And to frame this elevator pitch, as you called it, I think the question that really frames my talk is, why does supply chain resilience work until it doesn't? So we have started to witness a phenomenon where there are these high impact, low probability shocks that really disrupt the supply chains, and they have massive cascading impacts across not just one system, not just one supply chain, but across the entire system of essential supply chains. So if we look at it from a different perspective, all our essential supply chains are actually quite interdependent, whether it's energy, food, healthcare. They share same infrastructure, at least here in the UK. They share the same digital networks, even the same financial system as well. So the question then becomes, when there is one disruption in one system, it actually cascades down to all other systems. So this kind of interconnectedness and interdependency really makes us want to understand how or why resilience doesn't really work when we are facing such kind of disruption. I think the challenge is that resilience when doesn't work when there is a sustained stress. The shock is more systemic. And what we have seen from my research as well, that while risks are systemic and interconnected, our systems and our supply chains and our resilience planning is quite fragmented. And this kind of mismatch between the nature and anatomy of shocks and risks versus how we plan our resilience really challenges supply chain managers. So supply chain managers now, they are being faced with this big question: how can the supply chain grow and adapt while the broader system itself is unstable? So it's no longer a question of a supply chain or a network of supply chains. We're talking about systems of supply chains. So this takes us to the idea of what I can call a cross-contamination of disruptions, or how the disruption and the failure as a result of from one disruption could actually propagate across not just the same supply chain, but across a network of systems, or system of systems, what we can call a supra-system of supply chains. Not to take much of the time, so I think what I'm working on now, and what I would like really to explore further, and how we discuss this, how we address this problem, is we go back to the basics, which is supply chain design, how our systems and how our essential supply chains have been designed, and kind of like try to move slightly away from the capability based or capability focused thinking when we talk about resilience, more to think about more systemic resilience for the entire system of the supply chains, and to think how can we better design our supply chains to withstand these kind of interconnected shocks. So I think I'm going to end my pitch with this. Are we really going to witness a shift from a capability focused approach to resilience to a more systemic design-led focus for supply chain resilience? And thank you so much, Chris, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. I know how challenging it is to position the ideas in such a short period of time, but this is very interesting. So thanks for sharing your thoughts. I'm going to pass the word to my colleague Gerardo Heckman. So Gerardo, please take it over and tell us your main ideas.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning from Argentina. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here today. Well, my position today when we talk about geopolitics, becoming the first order constraint, it is a first order constraint for our supply chains. I think we are really talking about the end of a very specific era, the era in which firms could assume that markets, trade rules, logistic corridors were broadly stable, and that politics was simply a background noise. That assumption is no longer valid. And so from a global perspective, we see three shifts that are happening at the same time. The first is these trade tensions and industrial policies, and from the tensions between the United States and China to these tensions in Iran today, where these tensions are fragmenting what used to be relatively integrated playing field. Second, and not less important, energy, food, and critical minerals are increasingly treated as strategic assets. They are no longer just commodities. And third, the financial and regulatory risks. We have sanctions, capital controls, tariff escalation that are now directly shaping where firms source, manufacture, and invest. So if we look from this perspective in the Southern Cone, the picture is even more revealing. We are not just takers of geopolitical risk, but we are also providers of critical resources, food, lithium, energy corridors that are becoming central in this new landscape. At the same time, unfortunately, our domestic macroeconomic volatility, capital control, policy swings, and other layers of uncertainty on top of these global tensions are present. So firms operating with Latin America face this double exposure, global geopolitical shocks and local institutional fragility. So my main point is that resilience is no longer a defensive add-on, but it is now a design principle. Network design, sourcing strategies, financial planning must explicitly incorporate geopolitical and macroeconomic risk, especially in regions like Latin America, where politics overriding markets is not a theoretical scenario, is a recurring reality, unfortunately. The challenge to firms is to move from reacting shocks to engineering resilience ex ante, using what we have learned from decades of crisis in this side of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerardo. This is very interesting, the perspective that you are sharing, and actually supplements very well to what Dr. Jasmine mentioned a moment ago, right? So now let's switch to, like another perspective, the perspective of Professor Joachim, okay? Oh, wait a minute. Yes, Professor Joachim, so let's go with you. Please take it over.
Good to see you from Luxembourg. I guided a master thesis about 10 years ago by a guy named André Snoek, who later graduated from the CTL at MIT, working for a chemical company trying to make the supply chain more resilient. And one of the quotes from his thesis is, "Nobody gets credit for solving a problem that never happened." And when you make a supply chain more resilient, you do this in anticipation of problems that may or may not occur. And in most cases, the likelihood that they will not occur is a lot larger than the likelihood that they would. Just 2 years ago, I think most supply chains were not seriously considering the closing of the Hormuz Strait as a very likely scenario. And so if you would have planned for that and that wouldn't have happened, you would have wasted a lot of resources. That's one story to keep in mind. The other is something called survivor bias. So in World War II, there was a statistician named Wald, and he had to figure out where they should place extra armor on military planes. And so he looked at where the bullet holes were in military planes that came back after missions, and you would be tempted to put extra armor plating at the places where you see the bullet holes flock together. But Wald realized that all the planes that were shot down, he never got to see. And so the places to put armor is actually where you don't see the bullet holes, because that's where the planes, if they do get shot, don't come back. This is called survivor bias. And this happens also in supply chains. Companies that are not resilient do not survive really adverse events. Final story. I used to play chess with my brother. And I used to be, well, he used to beat me. He still does often, but that's another matter. I used to scheme elaborate plans to get a checkmate. And I learned that my brother did not. Yet he always won. And at one point, he explained to me how it works. I play chess such that at any given time, I have multiple options that I can choose from, and I try to remove options from you. Right? So rather than getting to some very targeted goal, the point is to make sure you have many options at any given time. If you have many given options at any given time, the likelihood that you have one option that can deal with the current conflict, crisis, whatever you're dealing with, is a lot higher. So it's about keeping options open. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joachim. This is a very interesting couple of analogies and an interesting message. So, well, I will take it over afterwards. But, well, last but not least, Professor Rafael, please give us your ideas.
Good morning, and many thanks to the MIT Global Scale Network for organizing this webinar. CLC, Zaragoza Logistics Center, has been part of these networks almost since its creation 25 years ago. So when supply chain was radically different than it is right now. And it's an institution of which I have the director to serve as academic director. So nowadays, in 2026, in the context of the Middle East conflict, we are reflecting on how supply chain strategies in the next scenario, characterized not only by disruptions, but the challenge imposed by geopolitics, trade tensions, and the reconfiguration of the international order, the international relationships. As you can see, 4 years ago, this is a picture I taught to my students many times, with the outbreak of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia in 2022, the Financial Times estimated that global companies had multiplied by 6 the number of references to geopolitics in their corporate transcripts, highlighting the growing needs for geostrategic knowledge and geopolitical advice to address business management, particularly in companies linked to supply chain management. So we don't have figures today in 2026, but I'm pretty confident that this number has been multiplied than tenfold if we extend the analysis of the two fundamental events in the current days. First, the global uncertainty in the tariff system following the announcements of President Trump. And the second evidence is the conflict involving Iran and the impact of the Strait of Hormuz, already told. And secondly, as you see in this slide, the study of Bednarski and others, geopolitical disruptions in global supply chain. It was published last year. Summarize the framework. You can see also identifying several responses to geopolitical disruptions impacting supply chains, even since Brexit, since 2016, so 10 years ago. For example, innovation, digital transformation, AI, big data, supply chain redesign, relocation of manufacturing, and different approaches to inventory and stock management. However, this framework, published last year, has become outdated in several months in light of these two important major geopolitical seats, tariffs and Iran, which are having such a profound impact on global supply chains. You see here, we are now living in what we can call the impact on manufacturing, raw materials, food, also rare earths, semiconductors, pharma industry, and many sectors. So we live now in the end of the status quo. We live in a new, even what it is being called in the political science, the end of rule-based international order, and also because of declarations of many leaders from different countries around the world, and it brings a trade reconfiguration. So the multilateral system governed by the World Trade Organizations and led by the US is nowadays even in crisis. US protectionism, but also the China instrumentalization of exports have replaced the win-win. So nowadays it's not working the win-win approach, but now the topics in geopolitics impacting supply chains, they are economic coercion, de-risking, and nearshoring, for example. But we have to make the question in Latin, qui prodest, who benefits more? We can see, for example, that the American Stock Exchange, the Dow Jones, is in 50,000 points, the top record ever. So there's no lose. For some winners, let's say the global equities, defense industry, or for example, in China, I will tell you later some figures about the recent growth of China in the first quarter of 2026, official statistics. So there's a long-term conflicts, Russia-Ukraine. So we must think in a new paradigm for supply chain in the time of perma-crisis and polycrisis. So also thinking not as a structural topic in supply chain management, but also as a collateral damage. So the need of permanent adaptation and optimization of decision models, data analytics, inventory protection, etc., etc. So I would like to highlight here the power of resilience and strategy as the two important topics to confront the geopolitical disruption on supply chains. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rafael. Very interesting ideas. So, well, now that we have positioned some of the most interesting perspectives from our panelists, so let me make a brief recap of what they said. So, Jasmine actually emphasized, like how we need to shift from like silo perspective to a more systemic design, criticizing the fragmentation that we are part of, because at the end, any potential impact will create this cross-contamination and propagation, and then we need to start defining, like systemic trust and develop that in order to redesign many of the supply chains. And this is something that was actually taken by many of the other panelists. In the case of Gerardo, he said the geopolitics are the backbone of making decisions right now. So we are at the era of changing, like the geographical scope and everything that is we are facing now. We need to start defining new regions, and probably the main three aspects that we need to bear in mind is the trade-offs in tariffs, that assets are not, that commodities are assets now, are not commodities anymore, and the financial and the regulatory risk are shaping the future of supply chain investments in infrastructure, etc. So actually the design angle is there, and this is a recurring reality that happens in many countries. Joachim made very interesting analogies regarding the survivor bias by equipping, yourself with resilience actions and mitigation strategies, and work on problems that matter. That's the way that he started, right? Keep options open at a given time. That's also very important. Keep an eye on what is happening outside and project yourself into the future. And Rafael started mentioning, like what has been the impact in supply chain in different spheres. Particularly started with what happened at the beginning of the conflict between the UK and Russia, and how this actually created an elevated, impact, and how the system started, like answering to that. What I take from his perspective is the framework that he shared with us: the innovation, the redesign, the stock management, the relocation, and the use of information systems as well. And who benefits more? That's actually the question, right? So now let's go to the next part of our discussion. So I would like actually to request my colleague Chris Frontiero to launch our second poll of today. And this is a multiple option one, and it's going to ask you, dear audience, what strategic dimensions should we focus on developing to face the current levels of uncertainty? Feel free to make your choice. Go for it. And meanwhile, I'm going to start asking a few general questions to our panelists today. So let me start with you, Jasmine and Joachim, okay? So the question is as follows. So we are living a very interesting moment, right? Geopolitical tensions are creating risk, and this is not necessarily uniform across the supply chain or across different regions. So in your opinion, which are the nodes or specific logistics stacks like sourcing, manufacturing, logistics, corridors, financing, that are the most exposed to the current disruptions, and how should the network be redesigned to reflect this potential asymmetry in the access to information, etc.? So let me start with you, Jasmine.
Thanks, Chris. So I think, I do agree with you first that all these nodes are being affected. I don't think that there is one that is being more affected more or to a greater extent than the other. I think from my perspective, we should look at the interdependencies between these nodes. They are all critical, equally critical to the supply chain. As we all know, as supply chain people, that if you don't have proper sourcing, then you don't have a supply chain. If there is no proper manufacturing and processing, then where is the product, etc., etc. So they are, we know that they are all interconnected. And what we can look into is more how we can strengthen the connections between these nodes in the supply chain. Something that also underpins all of these nodes in across supply chains is something that you really mentioned, which I think we didn't really touch enough on in our very short pitch elevator pitches, is trust and interorganization relationships, and how can we capitalize on these types of relationships to actually help us navigate this complex landscape, because some of the geopolitical situation, the disruptions, is actually what is in the background is lack of trust. And if we emphasize, and strengthen trust and how we can work together, we emphasize supply chain transparency, then probably this is going to help us be more resilient.
Yep. Thank you, Jasmine. Very interesting thoughts. Joachim, what are your thoughts?
I agree that all of the areas you mentioned are affected. I do think one of them is more affected than the other, which is the sourcing. If you have a supply chain that is highly dependent on oil, and that pretty much is everything that has plastic in it. So that's probably 90% of the audience today, perhaps more. Then clearly there is a problem. And so I think that the most important thing that you need to be resilient against is you need to be able to change sources. Now, if you are now coming to that conclusion and now trying to find another source, you are a bit late to the game, and you didn't solve a problem that didn't exist before, but it's affecting your ability to survive right now. So what you need is you need to set up a system in general such that you can have a source from different places, and that we know now that these different places need to be geographically quite dispersed, right? So if I have oil from two places, both of which need to go through the Strait of Hormuz, right now that's not helping. So what you need is you need to have multiple options, and when there is no geopolitical conflict, one of these options will be economically inferior, and there will be pressure to not use that one in favor of the one that is economically more attractive. And this is a temptation that we should learn to resist. And it's a cultural thing about how far into the future you want to look.
Thank you both. This is definitely very interesting. So what I take from you on this answer is like, number one, we need to probably develop more trust and interorganizational, relationships. This is called typically alignment. In one of the AAA frameworks that was created by Professor Holly a long time ago, it was agility, adaptability, and alignment. And alignment relies on that, right? Agility and adaptability is what you focus the most on. Like, given that sourcing probably might be the most affected. So how we can create and understand this interdependency, as mentioned by Jasmine, to see how this cascade of potential effects is going to impact the rest. And what you mentioned, Joachim, is you nail it, because in terms of how you move from being reactive to be more proactive, and develop this kind of cultural global perspective in understanding what is best for everyone, right? Resisting that temptation of, not being myopic in making decisions, and think about like what is next, and how you can preserve yourself into that position in the future, instead of, being tempted by what is happening right now. That's very interesting thoughts. So now I would like to ask the following question to Gerardo and Rafa. So you have a lot of very interesting experience. So from the operational and financial perspective, what does the risking actually require? And let me deep dive a little bit more on the following. So given that tariff structures have been, changing the world recently, so how inventory buffers, the dual sourcing, or even relocation like nearshoring translate into real cost and capability trade-offs in the organization? So how are companies doing that? So let me start with Gerardo, and then we go to Rafa.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will answer with a management point of view. That is to say, perhaps we have an opportunity, because, well, you see, we must create value for our customers, but creating value includes reducing discomfort, for example, reduce delays or whatever is involved there. And also, it's necessary to reduce uncertainty. So perhaps if we change the way we manage the supply chain, perhaps we have a huge opportunity to compete in better way. that is to say, perhaps we are working in a just-in-time way, and perhaps we should change to a just-in-case way. No? So in this sense, I think that we must build strong relationships with our suppliers in the sense of service. That is to say, we know pretty well how our materials enters in the supply chain of our customer, and perhaps we may develop strong relationships that include all these aspects that as are sources of value, they will be considered in the setting of price. That is to say, in price, the lower level is the cost, but the upper is how much the customer wants to pay. And perhaps our customer will want to pay much more if our service includes this relationship. And so it is a different way to manage all this stuff. Well, operationally, we know that perhaps diversification, buffers, visibility are good options, but in this sense, they will be better options if we include this strong relationship, not only considering operational aspects, but also financial aspects, for example, well, all that stuff. I hope you understand what I'm trying to tell you. Huh?
Yep. Thank you very much, Gerardo. This is very interesting. It's another perspective that I never thought of. But let's move on to Rafa. Rafa, what is your perspective? Oh, you're on mute, by the way.
Sorry, my perspective from this point is I would like to highlight one of the cases that we have here in Zaragoza, in Plaza. It's Inditex, one of the two top companies in the worldwide textiles, Zara and so on. So how they move also, how they confront it, because we are, as you know, CLC is working very closely to them in terms of operational and financial terms, the risking. So when it happens, for example, the geopolitical turn in Iran Gulf, so they need to relocate all the contracts with air cargo companies in order to avoid the scales in the middle. So it means an adaptation, as everybody has said. So the tariff structure didn't affect it too much, but inventory buffers, it did a lot because it changed the whole geography or strategy of the company and dual sources. The risking in that case means converting efficiency into option value, and the risking increases the visible cost to reduce the losses in crisis. So you have to think mostly as they happen in not only in short term, but you have to confront geopolitical disruptions in organizational and financial terms in mid and long term, because you know that we saw in the COVID and also because one of your previous remarks about the cultural. So you remember everybody adapted quite soon because it was like a cultural contagious of we need to adapt. In the COVID time, the pandemics, we need to adapt everybody very soon, the supply chains globally. But we knew that when vaccination was disseminated around the world, it was a short time period disruption. But nowadays, companies need to buffer inventory and rethink stock, and particularly the financial thing, that maybe you can have several losses in one quarter, but you have to think in the whole year or even more in the long-term approach.
Yep. Yep. No, this is very interesting. So In order to keep moving, for the sake of time, I would like to ask the following question to the four of you, okay? And it's in order to start moving into our particular questions section. So, and the question is, in your opinion, what is one assumption about global supply chains that you believe that is no longer valid or true since this year? What assumption about global supply chains is not valid anymore? Does not hold. So let me start with Joachim this time.
Well, the assumption that no longer holds is the assumption that because we have trade and we have economic dependence, therefore there will be no conflict, right? This is, well, it's one of those things that in principle we should know and we forget because the lifespan of a human is kind of short. And so if we live in a time of peace and prosperity for, a decade or more, we tend to forget this. And I think especially the Western world has forgotten this and has been reminded that this is not the case. And so you cannot only depend on the fact that you have economic dependence to keep conflict at bay. That's the number one, I think.
Yep. Thank you, Joachim. What are your thoughts, Jasmine?
Yeah, so Chris, the UK is no longer part of the European Union, but obviously we are in Europe. I think a lot of discussion nowadays is around how can we localize parts of the supply chain, how can we build and develop domestic capabilities when it comes to manufacturing or when it comes to our reliance on or sometimes over-reliance on imports. So in terms of energy, for example, and the again, dependency on oil in most of the sectors, now the government is they are mooting the idea of looking more into more sustainable types of energy and looking into actually incentivizing citizens and industry to look into more sustainable types of energy. So I think the assumptions is now is that they I don't want to get into politics, but 10 years ago when there was the conversation around Brexit, the assumption at the time was that the UK can have very strong trade relations with other parts of the world that are quite far from us, like Australia or the US. And now with the oil crisis, the oil prices crisis, and the energy crisis generally, and also the accessibility crisis, people are reconsidering and re-questioning whether this was the approach, and how can we instead of actually moving very far away to build trade relations, perhaps we should think about something that is more domestic or more regional. So obviously most of the assumptions on supply chains, they have changed dramatically in the past few years.
Yep. Well, that's an interesting idea, and the example is very interesting too. So let's go to Gerardo. Gerardo, in your perspective, what assumption does not hold anymore for global supply chains under the current circumstances?
Yeah. Well, one assumption that is no longer valid, I think, is that market logic will eventually dominate political logic. For many years, we believed that if a configuration was economically efficient, politics would ultimately adapt. But what we see now from tariffs that persist, welfare, although they are clear welfare losses, export bans, sanctions, industrial policies, all that stuff. What we see is that political objectives can override market efficiency for long periods. In Latin America, for example, we have lived with this for decades. Capital controls, export taxes, price regulations, they often contradict pure economic logic, but they persist. So the difference is that this now is the pattern in the global level. So firms must therefore design networks under the assumption that political constraints are structural, not temporary noise.
Yep. No, this is very, very intriguing. And yeah, I agree with you that nowadays there are some counterintuitive policies happening and regulations, right? But
Yeah.
well, last but not least, Rafa, what are your thoughts around this topic, especially with your knowledge about China and the Chinese, like trade around the world?
Well, I would comment or suggest two assumptions that are not longer true in 2026. The first one is tariffs have an impact on global supply chains, which is totally untrue. The data provided by the national statistics is that the global trade and exports from in China in the first quarter in 2026 have grown around 40%, and some particular sectors like semiconductors, 70% of increasing exports. How did they affect the tariffs on the announcement from the US government to the exports? Nothing, not at all. So I think companies and global supply chains are readapting. And the second assumption is no longer true, is the legend of sustainability, decarbonization, the 2030 agenda. And I would like to also to focus not on politics, but a particular decision of the European Union to postpone the implementation of the electric vehicle. And as you see, it has also reshaped the whole global supply chain on the automobile sector.
Yep. Yep. That's a very interesting one too. So, yeah, everybody would think like tariffs affect everyone the same, but based on what you just said, like it's completely different depending on the region, right? So let's switch gears here. I have been receiving plenty of questions in our comment box. So for the sake of time, I'm gonna change a little bit, like the perspective that I had initially with you. So let me start asking a few questions from the audience, to make it more interactive. So the first one is actually from Chris Kaplis. It's great to have you on the other side this time, Chris. So hopefully you are enjoying. What do you think? And this is for everyone, by the way. Let me choose a couple of you. What do you think about the global? How do you think the global trade will look like in 5 or 10 years from now, after the current situation settles? So let me bring that one to Joachim and then to Jasmine.
Sure. I think there's two scenarios. One is better for the world, and one makes us better supply chain professionals. The best case scenario is that these conflicts settle down, and 5 or 10 years from now, there will be business as usual. People will start believing the world is stable again, and we can have another decade like the 90s. That is one. I mean, like we did it in the 90s after the Berlin Wall fell, and we thought it was the end of history. Something like that might happen again. And for the world, that would be the best case scenario. I don't necessarily think it's a very likely scenario. The other scenario is that this conflict settles down in some way, but it's a moving conflict. So there's, moving conflict throughout the world, throughout the decade, and supply chain managers learn how to redesign their supply chains quickly in response to these types of things, and make sure they have contacts in many different places in order to do that, and sometimes some inventory reserves to buffer demand while you make these changes to a supply chain in response to these conflicts. That is a world where the world doesn't necessarily get better, but we as professionals become better at our job. And of these two options, I hope it's the first, and I worry it will be the latter.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Jasmine, what are yours?
Thanks, and hi, Chris. Chris Kaplis. So I think there are. I tend to say also that there are two scenarios. I think there is scenario for the medium term, the 5 years, and then there is the 10 years. I think generally for the near term or the more medium term, there's going to be more protectionism. So I think Joachim was more optimistic than me when he said that we might have like more prosperous. One of the scenarios was like more prosperous trade. I am. I think is going to be more friendshoring, more localization of supply chains, more focusing on domestic sovereign capability development. At least this is what we are seeing here in the UK. The government is investing, and most of the strategies, whether it's the industry strategy or even the recent critical minerals strategy, for example, and the defense strategy, it's all about bringing things back home. So we're talking about friendshoring, localization, diversification. I think also we're going to see a massive effort in redesigning supply chains and redesigning our systems to be more resilient. So more diversification and having more alternatives to our decisions in the supply chain. And this relates to the idea that the volatility that we are witnessing at the moment is actually is not just because of the geopolitical disruption. It's actually because the design of our systems was not designed for such level of uncertainty and volatility. This is why the impact is high, and this is why I think there is going to be a lot of work around redesigning and rethinking supply chains. 10 years, maybe things are going to, on the longer term, if countries started to build more trust, then maybe we can see something that is different. But I think to be honest, I think it's very hard to forecast 10 years from now. I mean, we are literally in this crisis. We are, we have like one event after event every day. So it becomes almost almost impossible really to think about 10 years from now.
Yep. Yeah, definitely it's a long shot, right? But I think that the question aims to, like provoke some ideas and create some potential scenarios, and that's the way that we should take it, right? So actually, let me choose another question from the list. We have several there. So this one is coming from Rafael Giovanelli. And I would like, Gerardo, maybe to answer this one is what are the key options or differences between large corporations and small, medium enterprises for building resilience in global supply chains? Cash availability to build redundancy is likely not an option for the small and medium enterprises. What would you recommend in that case, Gerardo, for building resilience?
Okay. Well, I continue with my perspective. That is to say, I think we should change the way we relate with our suppliers. That is to say, we must build a strong relationship between user and supplier. And well, in that way, perhaps all will be easiest. That is to say, regarding to your question about the future, I think that we will see a reshaped world. And in that reshaped world will affect everything. That is to say, I don't know what will happen. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think that the international organizations will have to reshape perhaps their regulation power will change. And well, all that will affect the different regions, the different possibilities between enterprises. But I feel that we should go not just on the technical aspect of the design, but on the political or the relationship aspect. So I know it is not the way that people in supply chain design thinks, but I think that perhaps the main change that we must do in our minds, and perhaps is no longer valid to say that this, as I said in the beginning, many of our materials won't be any longer mm, commodities. Perhaps they will be strategic in some sense, and so there's enough room to produce another way or another proposition value to our customers that will reshape prices and all the way we now see them. Hmm?
Right.
Thank you,
Yes.
Gerardo. Joachim,
I think we have a good opportunity. Let me be optimistic.
right?
Also for little enterprises.
Right.
All right. Thank you, Gerardo.
So
Joachim,
if you are a small enterprise and you are very cash constrained, you're probably working in a commodity market and have to be very efficiency driven. And the problem is that it's very hard to be efficient and resilient at the same time, because in order to be resilient, you have to solve a problem that you will not get credit for in all likelihood, but that looks very inefficient. So the way to do this is to diversify away from the efficiency-driven commodity that you are in. Like Gerardo said, right? You want to move away from commodities to something slightly more specialized. Then you can have that strong relationship that Gerardo was talking about, and that will give you options. But it might be very difficult to move out of that market, right? This is also something that takes a longer amount of time.
yeah, and let me add on top of that, given that part of my experience is also in micro and small firms, that you will need to probably start, like collaborating with others in order to make sure that this happens organically. By yourself, you wouldn't have a bargaining power to manage the risk or to manage, like what is coming to you in terms of responsibilities. So, but this implies a cultural mindset that we need to change as well, instead of competing with each other, right? But we can, like continue expanding this if you would like, Rafael. We can continue, like talking offline about this. It's a very interesting topic. So I'm gonna go to the next question. This one is from Gabriel Oye Igbemo. Probably from Africa. And this one goes to you, Rafa. Many firms speak of China plus one, but are we now moving from globalization? Oh, wait a minute, somebody moved the question. From globalization into a more durable model of network regionalization with multiple node supply chains across Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas with digital control towers coordinating flows? Because it seems less like deglobalization to me, rather more like a redesign of globalization from concentrated efficiency to distributed resilience. What are your thoughts there, Rafa? You're on mute.
Sorry, one more time. Thank you, Chris. Just to make sure, because we are heading to the time. Well, I think
Yes.
it's important to think that China plus one and the One Belt and Road and other Chinese initiatives, they are thinking for China. The most important thing is to think globally. I would like to highlight the different initiatives, approved by the Chinese government. Well, all the time is the same implementation of the Confucian geopolitics in order to promote sovereign equality, multilateralism, and they are called global development, global security, global civilization, and global governance initiative. And you have and also trying to give an answer to the question put and connecting this question with the question arised before by Chris Kaplis. How do you see the world? In China has a very clear in 5 years. So you have to read, please read all of you. This is almost my last suggestion. Please read the 5th year plan, 2024-2029, and you will see there how is important supply chain for China. How China is not only thinking about economic or cultural or even political, or technological growth and development, but also the importance of a strategic corridor, the security, the supply chains basis, the strategic hinterland, the ensure supply of food, energy, and resources, rare earth minerals. So I think the most important, also coming back to the debate of Joaquin, it's not only the debate between resiliency and efficiency, and also I would add a third part of the debate on strategy. So in that case, China has a long-term strategy who tries to combine not only resiliency with also efficiency and of course growth and increasing globalization based on the control of in this time of uncertainty of security for the supply chain networks, corridors, and infrastructures.
Thank you, Rafa. I definitely agree that there is, with the comment from Gabriel, that it looks like we are living as the title of our topic today, like a fractured world. And we are trying to move into this regionalization and trying to understand like where could it matter, right? But your points go, like are on a spot and go to the direction that I was also thinking on, Rafa. Thanks for that. So we only have a few minutes to go. So I'm gonna choose a couple of questions and I'm gonna like start wrapping up our today's session. We will try also to answer the questions that were posted here in the Q&A module or field, and also the ones from the comment field to you via email. Okay, so we have all the information from you. I'm gonna work together with the panelists to make that happen. So this one also comes from Chris Kaplis, and I would like to pass this to Jasmine and probably to Rafa. Can you comment on the idea that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is changing how countries view their reliance on oil? And could this usher in the increased development of nuclear and other renewable energy sources? What are your thoughts, Jasmine and Rafa?
Well, I saw, first of all, we saw today, the great news of today is how Emirates are leaving the OPEC. So there are news to which we are not prepared to. And it's a real shift in the geopolitics. But you have to see that it's more symbolic than real, because the share of Emirates oil production is not very big in the global. So I think the big countries like China or the United States, not Europe, they are these countries diversifying the energy supply, and I also that the Strait of Hormuz has more geopolitical or how to say a way to confront or to implement coercion that are real having a real impact on the general design of infrastructure, or for example the implementation of green energies and so on.
Thank you, Rafa. Jasmine, would you like to supplement that?
Yeah. I think, I'm going to take, or at least take two perspectives, one from developing countries. So developing countries, they have been really hit very hard with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, with the increasing prices of oil, obviously. So we have seen in certain countries, we have seen rationing or even decreasing the period where shops could be open, trying to decrease the consumption. So they were trying to manage the demand side of the supply chain, because there was this supply shock which comes from the Strait of Hormuz. For more developed countries, what we are witnessing is more investment into, and it's exactly as what Chris already mentioned in his question, more investment in alternatives to the oil as a source of energy. So at least I speak from a UK perspective, they have increased the investment in looking into alternative, whether it's wind energy, hydrogen, or nuclear fusion, for example, exploring the potential for nuclear fusion, which is a project I'm working on, how to strengthen the supply chains of these types of supply chains. So I think there is, to answer your question, Chris, yes, there is an increased development and increased investment in renewable energies. for very pragmatic reasons, because I see also that there is another question about sustainability and whether there's going to
Yep.
be impact on sustainability. So I think, yes, there will be impact on sustainability positively, but not really, at least how I see it is they are not really doing it for the sake of sustainability, but for very pragmatic reasons. So the impact of this on the other bottom lines, so the economic bottom line, the idea that we will have less disruption so that we can develop more our industries and our businesses in these parts of the world. So you could see that there are two distinct kind of reactions from two different types of countries developing the world. They are doing it, they are trying to decrease the demand and or control or crush.
Oops. Technical difficulties, I guess. I think that we lost Jasmine for a moment. Yes, I think she's back. Jasmine, are you back?
I am sorry.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah,
No
so
problem.
I mean, I was just ending what I'm saying. So we have like two different reactions from developing countries who are trying to crush demand and manage the demand, while the more developed countries, they're actually trying to find alternatives and diversify the supply side by looking into the development of new energy sources.
Yep. Yeah. No, thank you very much, Jasmine. So let's go for the last one, as I promised. So this one goes to you, Joachim, and it's from Anderson Bernal, who works in the Middle East, by the way, but for a big pharma company. How can pharma supply chains move beyond globalization to build a resilient, on-time delivery model for highly specialized products concentrated in a traditional manufacturing hub? Germany, Italy, Austria, by intelligently reallocating capacity, inventory, and logistics while keeping supply viable under cost, quality, and regulatory constraints. Oh, you are speaking on mute, my friend. So it's quite of a thesis, right? So go ahead.
Yes. How are pharmaceutical supply chains going to do this? Look, if you want to concentrate in these traditional markets, you should do it only if you are quite confident that there is no risk in, or at least geopolitical risk is the topic of today, in those areas. The only way you could do this is if you can convince the CFO that all the extra costs that you incur is offset by a decrease in risk. And so you need to look at financial numbers, not just in terms of magnitudes, but risk exposure. Whether or not this is a good idea, I'm not even sure. Like, I believe that it's probably a good idea to have at least two parallel supply chains at all times that are geographically dispersed. One of them might be in Europe. You might choose to focus on that one because, it might be less exposed to geopolitical risk. I would keep at least one other at all times. About how you would do this, well, one of the things that Europe needs to work on is we still need to break down some trade barriers. Even though we are one European Union, there are still many trade barriers between nations in the EU that need to be brought down. If this is brought down, the efficiency will go up and it will become more attractive to do this.
Thank you, Joachim. Well, unfortunately, the time is up. I know that there are so many, interesting questions that we would like to answer. Unfortunately, well, we don't have more time. So it's time to wrap up. So basically, the only constant is change, right, at the moment. So there were some consistent points in today's discussion, such as strategy, collaboration, some concepts that I didn't know, like permacrisis, polycrisis, and how the world is adapting to those. Of course, as we learned from our panelists today, there are many potential frameworks that we can use, and this was the first part of the conversation, positioning those thoughts and how we can, move from understanding each of these systems as a silo to really understand how this goes beyond the particular perspective of an organization. And we need to stop thinking about this from the myopic perspective and start thinking about how we can, create better efforts by connecting government, corporates, academia, and maybe many others to customize these resilience actions and also mitigation strategies in such a way that we start addressing, future disruptions. So one of the common discussions was about regionalization. That is definitely growing. How we should address that? I think that it depends a lot on how the impact is, like affecting the particular country, the particular industry. And this reminds me a project that was done long time ago at CTL by actually Chris Kaplis, Shardul Fadnis, and a few others that was on a scenario planning. Actually, what they came out with was like four different future scenarios, and one of them was just a globalized version of the world. Everybody was like joining together. Another one was a myriad of different markets, like everybody was protectionist. The other one was regionalization, and the other one I honestly don't remember. But actually, we are approaching more like the regionalization perspective. So how we should address that, I think is part of the conversation that we should keep having, but definitely data and model driven perspective and how to capitalize on these potential trade-offs is something that we need to be aware in order to keep investing on infrastructure, keep an eye on operations, keep an eye on developing this technology that is going to provide the end-to-end visibility. But one of the biggest, let's say learnings and morals from today is like, stop building silos and instead start building bridges within organizations. This topic that we didn't discuss too much, that is trust relationship or trust building, is very important, particularly for the alignment perspective. And this is super important to keep in mind. So thank you very much, everyone. Before we leave, so there is one last poll that we would like to launch. So Chris and Joy, you can launch the last poll. So, and this is actually to plan for future webinars, okay, from this Scale Global Network that is actually our arm in terms of like inviting these subject matter experts from our different scale centers, this federation that we have with different universities around the world. And please let us know, in short, what are those topics that you would like to deep dive the most. So today, the time really flew and we were not able to cover many different aspects. And each of these amazing panelists that I want to thank you for joining me in today's call have a very interesting perspective on different topics. So if you would like to learn more about it, just leave us a comment there and we will make sure, like to consider your opinion on those perspectives. So thank you very much for the engaging conversations, also for the audience. This was great. Joey, Chris Frontiero, who were in the backstage managing questions and making sure that everything were fine. And also, well, Joachim, Gerardo, Jasmine, Rafa, it was a pleasure. Really looking forward to our next conversation and hopefully a few projects that can be developed not only between among us, and between the different centers, but also with many of the colleagues who were present in the audience, because this is also a way to engage with you guys. So you want to contact us to develop any project in your corresponding region as a whole, as a network, we are here, okay? It was great. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice rest of your day, wherever you are at.